Mr. Potter and Tabby Row the Boat. Chapter 1. Sweaty. It was summer, and the weather was very hot. Mr. Potter and his fine cat Tabby lay around all day and sweated. They sweated on the front porch. They sweated in the kitchen. They sweated under the oak tree. They even tried the basement, but they sweated there too. "We're too old to sweat like this," Mr. Potter told Tabby. "We shouldn't have any sweat left in us." But they did, and they were miserable. Then Mr. Potter had an idea. "Let's go to the big pond," he said to Tabby. "We'll take Mrs. Teaberry and Zig." Their neighbors, Mrs. Teaberry and her good dog Zig, were sweaty too. Mr. Potter was sure of it because he had just seen Mrs. Teaberry dump a bowl of water on Zig's head. He went to Mrs. Teaberry and told her his idea. She thought a trip to the pond was a wonderful idea. She said that she would make tomato sandwiches. She would fix a kiwi salad. She would fill a jug with apple tea. Mr. Potter smiled. He liked Mrs. Teaberry's funny food. He went home to get Tabby ready. They were going to the big pond. Chapter 2. The Big Pond. The big pond was not far away, so Mr. Potter and Tabby and Mrs. Teaberry and Zig walked. It was a hot walk. It was a sweaty walk. It was a slow walk, but it got exciting. Mrs. Teaberry was wearing a big white hat covered with fake red grapes. A blue jay kept trying to steal the grapes. He swooped down and grabbed Mrs. Teaberry's hat from her head. "Shoo!" said Mrs. Teaberry. "Scat!" said Mr. Potter. Tabby and Zig were too hot to do anything. Mr. Potter and Mrs. Teaberry couldn't help laughing at the silly bird. Finally, Mrs. Teaberry gave it some kiwi salad, and it flew away. When they got to the big pond, there was a woman there renting rowboats. $2 for 2 hours, she told them. Mr. Potter and Mrs. Teaberry looked at each other. "What a deal," they said. They loaded up Tabby and Zig and lunch and rowed away. Tabby curled up under one of the seats. Zig tried to drink out of the pond, and Mr. Potter and Mrs. Teaberry headed for a good shady place. Chapter 3. Tall Tales. Mr. Potter spotted a clump of pine trees that made a good shady place. When they reached the place, Mrs. Teaberry took off her hat. Many of her fake red grapes were missing, but she didn't mind. She filled the hat with water and dumped it on Zig's head. Zig loved it. Tabby came out from under her seat. She batted at a water bug on the pond. Her tail twitched. Her teeth clicked. She forgot all about being hot. She just wanted that bug. Mr. Potter and Mrs. Teaberry took off their shoes and put their feet in the water. They filled their cups with apple tea. They chewed their tomato sandwiches. and they finished what was left of their kiwi salad. They told each other tall tales from their lives. Mr. Potter told about the time he won the county worm race. He said his worm's name was Jack. Mrs. Teaberry told about the time she won $300. She said she spent it all on nail polish. They laughed and laughed at each other's stories. Zig drank the pond. Tabby batted the bug. And everyone was happy. Chapter 4. Much Better. When it was time to row the boat back, Mr. Potter and Tabby weren't sweating any more. Mrs. Teaberry and Zig were cool as cucumbers. The trip had been a success. They left the rowboat with the rowboat woman and began the walk home. It was a hard walk. It was a sweaty walk. It was a slow walk. When they got home, they were all as hot as when they left. No one knew what to do. Then Mrs. Teaberry filled up her hat and dumped water on everybody's head, even her own, and they all felt much better.